A familiar stage is illuminated by the gentle glow of afternoon television. It was a world designed to feel cozy, secure, and unwaveringly hopeful, and for almost 20 years, millions of spectators watched Ellen DeGeneres enter this light with a natural grin, a soft sway of her shoulders, and a closing statement that became a cultural motto: be kind to one another. Strangers embraced as though they had known each other for years. Music throbbed through the studio, and audience members sprang out of their chairs. Everything felt feasible in that space. Not only was kindness promoted, it seemed to be the cornerstone of a whole empire during the day. However, away from the cheers, another narrative emerged. The televised jubilation was tempered with eerie whispered grievances, silent testimonials, and fleeting views behind the curtain. Former workers spoke of days that were more tense than humorous. They described unexpected outbursts of authority, icy silences, and unwritten regulations. Several reports claim that after the camera's red light went out, the generosity that was praised on stage swiftly vanished. The story that had made Ellen a national hero started to clash with a completely different picture, one that was created by the people who knew her best. The unavoidable question that emerged from this struggle between fiction and reality was how a brand founded on generosity could come to be associated with silence, fear, and wrath. The fissures had been developing for years, despite the surface appearing impenetrable due to years of polishing. The early warnings were written off by some viewers as miscommunications or isolated events. Others felt that the upbeat image could be a staged act, concealing feelings deemed too awkward for a public personality whose reputation depended on optimism. When reports of employee abuse, unequal power relations, and workplace misconduct started to circulate extensively, the strain reached a breaking point. Employee reports, interviews with former partners, and viral posts from disgruntled fans all came together to make one inevitable spotlight. The precise framework that would be used to understand Ellen's demise was her brand of kindness, which was previously her greatest strength. Once viewed as a representation of happiness, audiences now wondered how such brightness could coexist with such darkness. What mechanisms are actually causing this problem, though, beneath the glitz and the justifications? To understand how the entertainment industry functions and how a symbol is redefined, we will examine every aspect, from the first errors to the irreparable harm. We must start long before the controversy. When Ellen's humor was new, her viewpoint was unique, and her route appeared destined for success. In order to fully comprehend her journey, we can only comprehend how those same patterns ultimately contributed to her fall by going back and revisiting the processes that shaped her ascension. Her story is a complicated interaction of her personal background, professional expectations, and the brittleness of public trust rather than a straightforward tale of stardom gone awry. What comes out is a picture of a lady who used humor to gain acceptance, created a nice persona, and then faced the repercussions when that persona no longer matched her behavior. The contrast between Ellen's charisma on stage and her off-stage conduct will expose more than just a celebrity controversy in the upcoming chapters. It will shed light on the cultural apparatus that turns people into symbols, expects perfection from flawed individuals, and reveals all concealed flaws when the performance falters. One thing also becomes evident as this story progresses. A prominent figure's decline is rarely the result of a single incident. The first invisible crack is where it all starts. Ellen DeGeneres' early years provide a stark contrast to the well-known person she would eventually become. She came across as a comic with a keen sense of observation in the early years of her career, a performer who could turn the most mundane incident into a silent epiphany. She was not harsh in her humor. It was accurate, well-considered, and based on a knowledge of human frailty. By displaying this sensitivity through a deadpan delivery and a soft rhythm of understatement, she was able to engage audiences who recognized in her a reflection of their own fears and curiosity. She was the performer who seemed to be both funny and personable at comedy clubs all over New Orleans, someone who could make self-doubt seem almost graceful. It was more than just an acknowledgement of talent, when Ellen DeGeneres was named the funniest female comedian in America. It was the affirmation of an apparently irreversible trajectory. That image was strengthened by her appearance on The Tonight Show. Her effortless transition into the national spotlight astounded reviewers and enthralled audiences. Her now famous performance, in which she imagines phoning God on the phone, exposed a crucial aspect of her early identity. She was a comic who had an intimate perspective on the world and found humor in ordinary confusion, faith, and worry also. Because of her viewpoint, she was able to gain the trust of audiences who thought she was coming straight from the heart of her own experience. However, underlying this accomplishment lay a personal battle that molded the emotional underpinnings of her subsequent identity. Ellen often portrayed her drive to please as a lifelong inclination, founded in the traumas of her upbringing. Later interviews and her final comedy special revealed that her need for approval was more than just a simple personality trait, even though she rarely talked about these wounds in detail during her early career. It was a psychological defense mechanism designed to preserve her identity. She felt validated when others laughed. She felt safe when they admired her. In her own words, the limelight did more than just highlight her gift. It solidified her identity. When Ellen DeGeneres made the move from stand-up comic to sitcom star, this dynamic became even more apparent. Many facets of her genuine personality were reflected in her series, which focused on a neurotic bookshop owner who used humor and complex internal monologues to negotiate life. The show gained traction with viewers who liked its authenticity and its willingness to confront emotional discomfort through comedy. However, everything changed when Ellen made the historic choice to come out as gay in the legendary Puppy episode. It was a moment that revolutionized both television and her personal career trajectory. The conflict between her public persona and inner truth was made evident on a national level for the first time. Despite being commemorated today as a significant achievement, the fallout was disastrous for her career. Ellen was unexpectedly cut off from the platform that had defined her identity when ABC canceled the show in 1998. The popular support she had previously depended on vanished virtually immediately. Ellen claims that not a single executive contacted her. When her assistant read the morning paper's news, she found out about the cancellation. The audience applause had healed the emotional wounds, but this sudden seclusion reopened them. She began to doubt not only her position in the field, but also the authenticity of the recognition she felt she had merited. In the years that followed, Ellen was forced to face the vulnerability of a likability-based career. In spite of her early success, she struggled to find fresh jobs, experienced public doubt about her relevance, and underwent a period of professional seclusion. However, it was precisely this time of hardship that made her comeback in the early 2000s seem quite miraculous. Her portrayal of Dory in the animated movie Finding Nemo restored the affection that viewers had previously connected with her. Viewers were reminded of Ellen's distinct humorous style by the character's optimism and amnesia, which were depicted with unexpected emotional depth. It unlocked doors that had been securely closed for years and exposed her to a whole new generation of families and kids. The public's need for compassion seemed to be almost exactly in line with her comeback by the time The Ellen DeGeneres Show debuted in 2003. The United States was going through a time of cultural separation, political unrest, and a growing need for entertainment that was upbeat rather than combative. Ellen seemed to be the embodiment of that wish. Dance breaks, surprises, charitable deeds, and sincere discussions with regular people were all part of her performance. She created an atmosphere where happiness appeared unplanned and within reach. She provided reassurance as well as entertainment, according to many spectators. But the establishment of this setting also signaled the onset of a more serious structural issue. Ellen's on-screen demeanor of benevolence was not the same as the multifaceted individual she was offstage. She was under pressure to always perform emotionally in a consistent manner because of the demand for unbroken positivity. In this setting, being kind was expected, and occasionally even required, instead than being a natural expression. Subsequent statements from former workers claim that the emphasis on constant cheerfulness fostered a work environment where real feelings were repressed and appearance took precedence over reality. The stakes for preserving Ellen DeGeneres' character increased dramatically when she transitioned from performer to brand. Her name came to represent giving, happy times, and the notion that watching television throughout the day could be a haven from pessimism. This expectation left no space for emotional complexity, weariness, or frustration. She was presented to the public as a polished, consistently happy version of herself. The distance between the Ellen portrayed on screen and the Ellen as reported by people who had private interactions with her grew as a result of the pressure that came with this image. During the Writers Guild of America strike in 2007, the image's first obvious fissures appeared. Ellen crossed the strike line to continue filming, but many talk show hosts stopped production in solidarity with their writing staff. There were differing opinions about her choice. Her actions, according to her supporters, were taken to protect the jobs of the crew members who relied on the show for their livelihood. She was criticized for putting ratings and the security of her own brand ahead of fair treatment and collective bargaining. Regardless her motive, the incident was the first time her self-protective decision seemed to conflict with her on-screen benevolence. Later on, a former writer recounted instances during rehearsal when Ellen's smile would vanish as soon as the director yelled, "Cut," giving way to a severe look and impatient comments aimed at the writing crew. According to this description, the easy charm she conveyed to the audience contrasted sharply with her irritation with jokes that fell flat. This evidence gave a preliminary indication that the warm persona might not apply equally to those working behind the scenes, even if it did not garner much attention at the time. The bigger issues that would ultimately reshape her reputation were paved with these early fissures. They showed the first indications of a discrepancy between Ellen's public persona and the reality that those closest to her faced on the job. They also implied that the causes of her decline were gradual rather than abrupt, stemming from years of pressure to maintain a self-image that was never able to properly reflect the complexity of her inner life. What are your thoughts on this? Please leave an amen comment below so that we can carry on with the incomplete stories. The way that audiences absorbed celebrity storylines changed in the years preceding the late 2010s. Every move, every expression, and every discrepancy were magnified by social media. In that environment, the public started to become less receptive to the image Ellen had developed over almost 20 years. After accepting the well-preserved portrayal of compassion, viewers began going back and rewatching previous interviews and programs, and they began to gather instances where Ellen's lighthearted taunting bordered on discomfort. These early compilations represented a shifting cultural expectation. Authenticity was no longer optional, even though they did not yet pose a danger to her career. When reality indicated differently, a public figure who depended on a moral brand would be held responsible. The now famous gift shop incident was one of the most widely shared examples from this era. At first glance, the format seemed innocent. Members of the audience were asked to select one item from a tiny gift display. The majority obeyed, choosing one memento with a light-hearted sense of appreciation. However, the tone drastically changed when the show disclosed that one woman had taken more than was allowed. The audience chuckled, and the piece was framed as a lesson in integrity. Ellen called her out in front of the entire studio audience, played back the video for comedy effect, and told her to sit in what she playfully termed Ellen jail. However, several viewers afterward expressed uneasiness, pointing out that the disparity in power turned a fun game into a humiliating public event. Those who watched the video again said it was one of the first and most obvious signs that the be kind philosophy did not always apply outside of the performance's requirements. When the New York Times published an article titled "Ellen DeGeneres is not as nice as you think," it further complicated this story by examining Ellen's comeback to stand-up comedy and her internal battle to maintain a consistently positive image. Her conviction that kindness was the fundamental principle of her workplace was chronicled in the article. She claimed that she established a rule that everyone should be proud of their workplace and that no one should raise their voice from the very first day of her performance. But the Times also reported that Ellen was angry with anyone who doubted her sincerity, claiming that the charges of cruelty were untrue. In retrospect, these remarks are an uncomfortable prelude to the subsequent revelations. Numerous accounts from people working behind the scenes would eventually conflict with the insistence on pure positivity, which was portrayed as an unwavering moral norm. On July 17, 2020, BuzzFeed News released a comprehensive investigation that drastically altered the public's perception of the Ellen DeGeneres show, marking the first unquestionable breach. One current employee and 10 former employees shared their stories in the piece, describing a workplace characterized by anxiety, instability, and a recurring discrepancy between the show's internal culture and its message. "Be kind only happens when the cameras are on," said one former employee. "It is all for the show." This revelation struck a chord with many, not only because it went against Ellen's public persona, but also because it encapsulated the very concern that many devoted viewers had started to express, that the generosity they thought they saw could have been fake. Instances of microaggressions, racist statements made by management, and severe disciplinary proceedings that targeted small offenses were also detailed in the report. One account claims that a supervisor would send messages requesting an explanation for an employee's absence only after waiting for them to return from the lavatory. Others described instances where personal favoritism, rather than merit, determined whether opportunities were given or refused. These tales broadened the public discourse beyond Ellen's individual actions to include more general structural problems in the setting of her show's production. People like Hannah Muscat, who had been with the show since its launch in 2003, provided additional perspective. Muscat claimed that from the start, staff members were instructed not to approach Ellen's office, speak to her personally, or engage with her unless specifically directed to do so. She spoke of an environment where workers lived in continual fear of making mistakes that would put their jobs in danger. Muscat also described instances in which Ellen would observe and laugh instead of stepping in when executive producer Ed Glavin would shout at employees during production meetings. Muscat claims that Ellen called Glavin her attack dog, implying that his combative management style was an outgrowth of her own power. This information turned out to be essential for a lot of viewers. When evidence suggested that Ellen not only knew about, but also approved of terrible treatment, the notion that she was oblivious to it started to lose credibility. Alongside these work-related anecdotes, supporters' personal narratives became viral on social media. Kevin Porter started a viral thread asking people to share their terrible experiences with Ellen, which is one of the most cited cases. Porter himself recalled making a realistic bust of Ellen and presenting it to the show with a handwritten letter as part of a fan contest when he was 15. A few weeks later, he discovered that the bust had been used as a prop in a game and had been randomly distributed to another spectator with a monetary reward. His endeavor was not recognized for its emotional value. This tale reflected a larger disappointment for many readers of the thread: the disconnect between the personas of those who had direct contact with her and the kind, sympathetic persona they had seen on TV. Warner Media opened an internal probe into the claims as these accounts grew in popularity. 3 senior producers linked to the toxic behavior were eventually fired by the company. Ellen responded by sending a memo to her employees in which she apologized for the working conditions and expressed dissatisfaction. She restated her initial idea of the event as a place of respect and joy in the memo. She claimed that as the show grew, the culture shifted and that she had become overly dependent on other people to maintain her standards. She said that she had not realized how serious the problems were. The message seemed to address the topic without addressing the systemic flaws that allowed such conditions to exist, according to many observers. Critics claimed that despite Ellen's apologies, it was unclear how she would contribute to upholding the show's ethos. The discrepancy between the testimonies and the apology served to further solidify the idea that her particular brand of kindness was incompatible with the realities that the former employees had described. The story of the Ellen DeGeneres show changed from isolated criticism to a full-scale public reckoning at this point. The pattern that emerged indicated that the early warning indicators were not isolated incidents, but rather were a component of a broader system that depended on showing kindness rather than practicing it. And once the public saw the pattern, every new detail that emerged not only accelerated, but also guaranteed the persona's collapse. Public opinion of the Ellen DeGeneres show underwent a significant upheaval as the accusations persisted in spreading on digital media. What was once regarded as a pillar of optimism during the day was now under intense scrutiny. After years of watching celebrities laugh on Ellen's couch, viewers started to wonder if the happy atmosphere had ever been real. In the end, Ellen herself became the center of the controversy, despite the fact that it started with the actions of producers and managers. Viewers were curious as to how a host who was praised for having empathy and compassion could oversee a workplace that was characterized as unfriendly and unfair. One significant change occurred at the start of season 18. Ellen took the stage again and apologized to the audience directly. She apologized, acknowledged the situation, and assured everyone that changes were in the works. Although the speech was measured and well-crafted, many of those who had closely followed the allegations were not satisfied. These viewers felt that the apology was shallow and vague, which was surprising from someone whose image and leadership were at the center of the dispute. The tone implied damage control rather than a genuine examination of the fundamental problems, according to public commentary at the time. Audiences' reactions were immediate and measurable. Shortly after the season premiere, the show's viewership dropped by over 1 million, and the decline persisted throughout the season. This decline was a sign of a more general change in public opinion. Viewers who had previously found solace in Ellen's on-screen persona now acknowledged a disconnect between the acts of kindness she displayed and the accounts of those around her. The decline was a reflection of a deeper realization rather than just a reaction to the scandal. A brand based on moral authority cannot stand up to evidence that contradicts its core values. By May of 2021, the consequences were inevitable. Ellen declared that season 19 would be her show's last season. In her emotional announcement, she thanked her team and the audience while also looking back on the previous 18 years. She talked about shared moments, laughter, and the deep ways the show had influenced her life. In her own words, the choice had been tough, influenced by months of introspection and waiting to see how staff and fans would react. The announcement marked the end of an era for viewers who had been watching for a long time. Critics saw it as a moment of responsibility. The clarity of this resolution was quickly called into question, though, when Ellen brought up the subject once more in interviews with the media. She insisted that the controversy had not played a role in her decision to terminate the show when asked if the accusations had affected her decision. She maintained that she would not have come back for the last season at all if the scandal had been the driving force behind her decision. She also implied a degree of intentionality behind the backlash by calling the months of criticism too orchestrated and too coordinated. Ellen described the outpouring of negative attention as being out of proportion and overwhelming, more like an assault than an expression of sincere concern. Tension increased as a result of this interpretation. The idea that the backlash was a coordinated effort was hard for viewers who had read the testimonies and followed the investigation to believe. Rather, they viewed the criticism as a logical outcome of stories that had been circulating for years but had only recently become widely known. The perception that Ellen was still unwilling to acknowledge the systemic nature of the issue was strengthened by the discrepancy between her interpretation and what the general public understood. When she responded to the query, "How could you not know?" the tension increased. Ellen mentioned the difficulty of running a show with 255 workers spread across several departments and buildings. She stated that she delegated responsibilities and trusted leaders in each area to uphold her values. She emphasized that her name was on the show and that she was deeply affected by the allegations. She also claimed that she had been unaware of the problems and was frustrated that no one had come up to her directly to report them. According to many observers, this explanation weakened her credibility. Many found it hard to believe that a host so strongly linked to kindness was ignorant of widespread wrongdoing. At the same time, personal testimonies from audience members added another layer to the evolving narrative. One viewer recounted traveling from Chicago to Los Angeles to attend a taping of the show, thrilled to experience the warmth she had admired for years. She was selected to participate in a segment, only to be told by producers that she should not appear too clever or too humorous because Ellen was the star and the primary comedic presence. After the cameras stopped rolling, the audience member described Ellen as distant and disengaged, interacting only when the red light was on. According to her account, the contrast between the televised persona and the off-camera demeanor was so stark that it left her emotionally unsettled. This testimony resonated widely online, reinforcing the belief that the kindness projected on screen was an act tailored to performance, not a reflection of personal character. The most decisive moment in this downward arc arrived in 2024 with the release of Ellen's stand-up special titled For Your Approval. For the first time, Ellen addressed the scandal through the lens of comedy, speaking directly to the tension between her public persona and the allegations that dismantled it. She joked that she may have been better received if she had ended her show by saying, "Go forget yourself," rather than "be kind to one another." With this remark, she inverted the symbolism of her signature phrase, framing it as a liability rather than a virtue. She also described her pursuit of laughter and approval as an attempt to soothe the wounds of her childhood, acknowledging that much of her identity had been built on the need for external validation. Then, with a sudden shift in tone, she remarked, "Thank God for the money," a statement that many interpreted as dismissive of the moral framework that had defined her show. The special received overwhelmingly negative reviews, many arguing that Ellen had chosen sarcasm and deflection instead of introspection. For critics, the performance confirmed what they had suspected. The persona of endless kindness was no longer something she felt obligated to maintain. The act of mocking her own signature message suggested that the values she had promoted for nearly 20 years had been a strategic asset rather than a personal conviction. At this point, the collapse of Ellen's public image was complete. The kindness that once elevated her career had become the lens through which audiences interpreted every misstep. Her attempt to reframe the narrative only deepened the divide between her and the public, revealing a version of herself that no longer aligned with the figure she had portrayed. The downfall did not hinge on a single scandal or a fleeting controversy. It arose from years of tension between image and reality, culminating in the realization that the kindness presented on screen was not the kindness experienced behind the scenes. The story of Ellen's rise and fall finishes not with the shock of a sudden collapse, but with the quiet understanding of a lengthy arc completing itself. After 19 seasons, innumerable moments of broadcast kindness, and a reputation that once seemed unshakable, the curtain finally fell on a show that had influenced a generation of daytime television. The aftermath shows an industry recalibrating its expectations. The period of unexamined personalities was ended, replaced by an audience more alert to the subtleties beneath the performance. Ellen's exit from television signified not just the end of a popular program, but also the closure of a cultural chapter defined by the power of image and the fragility of public confidence. In the years following the final season, discourse about Ellen moved from fury to reflection. Some viewers remembered the joy she brought into their homes, the unexpected gifts, the passionate interviews, and the illusion that kindness could be simple if only someone practiced it loudly enough. Others could not forget the testimonials of employees who highlighted terror, unpredictability, and emotional strain. Between these two myths lies a delicate truth. Ellen produced a show that really uplifted millions, but the system behind it demanded a perfection that no human could sustain. According to media observers, the issue revealed the hazards of establishing a brand around moral authority rather than human authenticity. The greater lesson extends beyond Ellen herself. Fame accentuates both virtue and imperfection, and the need to retain a distinct identity sometimes fractures even the finest public figures. Despite the fact that people are naturally contradictory, the entertainment industry values consistency, clarity, and symbolic power. The gap between the ideal and the real person widens with every year that a celebrity becomes the personification of kindness, compassion, or fortitude. What occurs when such distance becomes impossible to conceal was illustrated by Ellen's demise. Her experience reflected a larger theme. Public acclaim can propel an individual to remarkable heights, but it can also quickly deteriorate when it turns out that the symbol was never quite in line with reality. Ellen is still seen through a variety of prisms today. Supporters contend that she promoted initiatives that raised awareness of underrepresented cultures and had a good cultural impact. Her legacy, according to critics, is inextricably linked to the accounts of people who suffered because of the circumstances surrounding her performance. Both viewpoints highlight a crucial reality about contemporary celebrity. No legacy is unique. It is influenced by impact as much as purpose, and impact is decided by people who have experienced the shadow of a prominent figure's authority. The question that still stands goes well beyond Ellen's story. As spectators and participants in a performance-based culture, how do we tell the difference between controlled image and true virtue? How do we strike a compromise between the need for responsibility and the demand for role models? And how can prominent personalities handle the tricky balance between their own flaws and the demands of millions of people? More than just a warning is left behind by Ellen's story. It serves as a reminder that the greatest facades frequently hide the most profound flaws, and that kindness must be practiced rather than performed. Her ascent served as evidence of the transformational power of humor and visibility. The repercussions of ignoring the areas where image and reality vary were made evident by her downfall. Perhaps the last chapter of Ellen's journey will mark a sea change if sincerity, not performance, shapes entertainment in the future. The target audience has evolved. The culture has evolved. Furthermore, the need for mystique has lost ground to the demand for openness. Although Ellen's program will live on, the principles it imparts will influence the upcoming generation of actors, storytellers, and fans. No matter how long it takes, the truth eventually makes its way through the spotlight.